Okay. Good afternoon to all. Respected Director IWST, guests of honor and chief guest, and dignitaries attending the webinar. Thank you for inviting me to this prestigious webinar on augmenting teak timber in India, a way forward. So I will be presenting on teak production, global and regional perspectives. So if we look at the total area of commercial plantations in the tropics, we can see that majority of the area is occupied by eucalyptus, followed by pine, rubber, and of course, teak occupies the fourth place. And among the planted forest also, Asia Pacific has a good share of its total forest area under plantations. When we all know that in the morning session we have had ample discussions on the teak wood aspects and why it is so preferred in the international market. And when we look at the natural distribution of teak, we know that it is distributed in India, Lavopedia, Myanmar, and Thailand. So over the years, if we look at the natural teak forest in these natural teak habitats, we can see that there has been a small decline, except say in Thailand. And more by the late 20th century, what happened was that there has been a shift of policy from the production perspective to, and most of the forest departments and government policies has been oriented towards a conservationist approach. So natural teak felling has been banned from natural teak forest across the tropics. So, but the demand of teak, as it was increasing in the market, it had the focus was shifted to to plantation teak, and from the natural teak growing area, this teak plantations has expanded to more than over 70 countries across the globe. So now teak is cultivated in approximately 70 countries across the globe, and it has outgrown its natural teak growing areas. If we look at the area of planted teak by region, we can see that if Africa, Caribbean, Central America, Oceania, and South America all have nearly something like 500 to 600% jump in the teak planted areas since the last 4 to 5 decades. If we look at the area change in planted teak from 1995 to 2010, data collected by Food and Agriculture Organization and ITTO, it can be seen that Africa, that especially Ecuador, Ghana, Guatemala, then in South America, all had a very high transformations in the landscape where teak was considered as an important plantation species. Whereas if we look at the traditional teak growing areas, we can see that the changes were something very minimal. Now, if we have a look at the global teak wood exports and imports, we can see that teak wood is basically imported in two major forms, in roundwood and a sawn wood. If we look at the roundwood imports, we can see that India is having the major share of imports from across the globe, with 74% of teak global roundwood imports coming to India, followed by Thailand and China. And we import the maximum roundwood from Myanmar, Ghana, Ecuador. Then there are other countries like Costa Rica, Malaysia, Benin, Nigeria, and all. But the maximum share comes from Myanmar, Ghana, and Ecuador. Now, if we look at the global teak sawnwood imports, we can see that the maximum of sawnwood imports goes to China. Then it comes to India. Then Thailand, Taiwan, and South Korea are other areas where the sawnwood imports are there. Then from where it comes, it's basically from Tanzania, Brazil, Germany, USA, Canada, Ghana, Benin, and Russia. Though some of these countries do not grow teak, what happens is that they import logs, then convert it into sawnwoods or other products, and then import it back to China, Asia, Taiwan, South Korea, and other areas. Major trade flows of teak, if we have a look, we can see that in the 1995, in the 1990s, basically what the teak trade was mainly concentrated towards Japan, South Korea, and a major chunk towards Europe. but by 2015, if we look at the trade flows, we can see that most of these, like 90-95% goes towards the China and India. So in India, majority of the teak that comes into our into is imported into our country is basically used domestically, and very few quantity goes out, or we export very few quantity as finished products. Whereas in China, what happens, nearly 90% of the thing that comes to their market is processed and then sold back to US and European markets. If we look at the average teak log prices there is no consistency in the classification of teak log and its quality across the world. But for the sake of the convenience, we have classified it into small, medium, and large based on their girth at the midpoint. And we can see that the teak prices are one of the most valuable, if we look at any of the timbers, it is one of the most profitable timber that we get. And as the size of the timber increases or the girth increases, the price usually increases 2 to 3 fold. And one of the major shift that had occurred in the teak timber market was the natural teak felling ban that happened in Myanmar on April 1st, 2014. So otherwise, the trend had been more or less stable, or the increase was also very gradual. But what happened after 2014 was there was a huge jolt to the timber market with respect to teak. The demand was still there, but the supply came down very drastically. And so what happened, the long duration teak logs that used to come from Myanmar got reduced, and this is being gradually replaced by the short duration plantation logs that comes from Africa and South America. So if we look at the growth performance of teak in different regions, we can see that the traditional teak growing areas like India, Thailand, and other countries in South Asia and Southeast Asia have a maximum of mean annual increment. This mean annual increment of, say, 4 to 5 meter cube per hectare per year. And but if we look at the newly grown areas in Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean, we can see that the mean annual increment meter cube per hectare per year goes up to 15 meter cube per hectare per year. That is an enormous jump in terms of the quantity of wood that they produce within a short period of time. Now, so if we look at some of the analysis that we had done on a regional basis, we had assessed the growth performance of teak in Kerala, and we can see that teak, Kerala, which was considered once as a mecca of teak, is fast losing ground because of loss of productivity, and we could hardly find any plantation with over 3 meter cube per hectare per year mean annual increment, whereas the average mean annual increment in India itself is something like 4.5 to 5 meter cube per hectare per year. So if we look at the site quality classification, we had done a site quality classification, and we can see that most of the plantations, something like 90%, 89 to 90% of the plantations fall under either site quality 2 and 3, and nearly 10% of the plantations even fall under site quality 4. So what are the major setbacks or issues that affect the teak plantations? Of course, one of the major thing that has to be considered is the site selection, which is very important, and along with the planting material, which will affect 35 to 60% of the total productivity in the long run. Then there is, of course, the planting phase, the establishment phase, canopy closure, then management phase, and final felling. All of those will surely have an impact on the teak cycle and its productivity. But the initial phase is very important. Site selection is a very must, and the planting material has to be selected most prudently. So there has been some discussion going on how to select the site, and we know that teak grows in a very highly fertile soil. but to have a quantitative assessment of what are the general parameters that we should consider for having a good site or a good site requirement for teak. The latitude, of course, it's the tropic. The altitude should be something 0 to 900 meters, temperature 20 to 27, which is mean annual temperature 22 to 27 degrees Celsius, with the precipitation around 1200 to 2500, and 3 to 5 months of dry season, and slope should be somewhere around 0 to 25%. Physiography, bottom of valleys will be the best suited for good teak productivity, and of course flat and undulated area will be nice. And the soil origin, alluvial basaltic limestone, sandstone, quartzite, shale, cohesive high clay, sand, and smectitic soils. That is the smectitic soils, which is basically found in the Deccan Trap region, the black cotton soils. Such soils are usually not suited for teak plantation, and it will act as a limiting condition. Depth of the soil ideally should be between 90 centimeter to 2 meter. A good water holding capacity. There should not be any compaction. Bulk density should be low. Good drainage and high aeration. These are the factors which are required for good teak plantation. This has been put over from a lot of literature which has been generated on teak from different parts of the world. So if we look at the microstructures, micro soil parameters, we can see that we usually pay attention only to say pH, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and at the maximum organic carbon. But there are a string of factors that will affect the productivity of teak, the site conditions of teak. So calcium, aluminum, calcium plus magnesium, clay, soil depth, CEC, all these are important as the primary nutrients of the organic carbon. And our analysis of the Kerala sites shows that most of these parameters at the best can be described as marginal. And we had very few plantations which had optimum of these conditions for teak growth. Then another major problem with the site quality assessment is we assess the site quality basically by considering the GBH or the top height. But the GBH and the top height works only if the plantations are raised by giving all the managerial practices, all the management practices in a timely and appropriate manner. But most of the times, as we know, that this doesn't happen, and there will be time lags in giving the operations or untimely operations, which will not yield the same results as that of a good plantation management will do. So the GBH and top height based site quality classification has to be revisited if we are going to have a realistic assessment of the plantation and take a decision that okay, this plantation is not good, so why we manage it for 50 to 60 years or 80 years, why don't abandon it and leave it for eco restoration? So before taking that, we should be actually really looking at if the site is good for the teak plantation or it has to be retained. So different combination of site quality parameters are being proposed across the globe in assessing the site quality in a more realistic manner. Quality planting material, of course, as I have been pointing out, something like it will affect 40 to 60% of the productivity. So this you will be well aware of all these materials: stem, root trainer, containerized planting material, then macro propagated plants, micro propagated plants, and bud grafts. One major concept that has being evolved is like instead of the quality planting material, we will have to look for the target planting material. The quality of the material per se will not yield the desired results at specific sites. So we will have to see the nursery client partnership, then what sort of site we are going to outplant, and not the appearance, but the material that we need has to be given more importance. So we will have to before going for a nursery development, we will have to ask what are the outplanting objectives, how much year we will have to grow the plantation, what is the yield we are expecting from that particular site, what are the site conditions, what are the limiting conditions, whether there is a good drainage or whether the site is not having good fertility. Then what are the mitigating factors that will be allowable with our outlay of budget outlay? That is an important factor. Then the species and genetic sources. We, being the coordinator of TeakNet, most of the time we get questions on the quality of the planting material, wherein the private firms often mislead the farmers and other cultivators, saying that if you grow this, you can have the yield of a 30 or 35-year-old teak in 5 to 6 years, which is impossible. So that is the way they get cheated. So species and genetic sources of the planting material is very important. Then the stock type, outplanting tools and techniques that we are whether we are going for mechanized systems or manual systems. Then outplanting window, when we are going to plant, before the monsoon, during the monsoon, or after the monsoon. So these are very important considerations that has to be taken care of while taking out a good teak plantation. This is a case study of a successful targeted plant material nursery in Tanzania. This was, of course, we can say that this is the first attempt in Tanzania, and one of our retired scientist, Dr. Casey Chako, who was engaged by TeakNet to go over there and look after the plantation, had raised this, and it is giving very good results. And this is a polybag seedling used for boundary planting in an agroforestry system in Kerala. And you can see the growth after 6 months after planting. And after 1 year, we could get up to 13 to 18 centimeter GVH and 4 to 4.85 meter height. So it is possible to get a good growth in our conditions. And the clone versus seed is always a big argument in the areas in especially in South America. They usually prefer clonal plantations, where they have reported that the volume, biomass, and diameter all have very high growth values when compared to that of the seedling plantations. And soil transformation is one of the major one of the major things that affects when we are continuously raising monoculture plantations on the same piece of land. So what happens is basically the soil gets depleted of all the nutrients. Basically, we can call it like a soil mining effect. Wherein the plant takes up huge quantities of the required nutrients, and of course a few quantities returned back, but the bulk of it is removed along with the timber when we harvest it and remove it out of the forest. But in the natural forest, what happens is the wood, the dead and decaying wood will be falling back to the soil, and in due course will be adding it mostly to the soil itself. So what happens when after first rotation, when we go to the second rotation, we will have to supplement this with what is lost from the soil. Otherwise, the soil will lose its productivity. So with successive rotation, what we have observed, basically it affects soil porosity, water movement, nutrient cycling, impairs soil growth, and bulk density also gets affected and becomes unsuitable for planting. So basically what happens, not only with teak, but with all monoculture plantations, what happens is the root foraging, or the root captures its necessary items from a single layer or a single depth. So what happens, this layer gets completely depleted with respect to the required minerals and other essential items. So, but what happens in a mixed type of plantation, there will be rooting depths to different soil layers, and hence it can harvest whatever is needed from these different layers and in due course it can be circulated. So there has been a lot of experiments with the teak mixed plantations, and across the world, not only in India, across the world, there have been a lot of the teak mixed plantation experiments. And most of the studies with other species in India have met with either failure or were only partially successful. So this is a research gap that has to be addressed. Successful models, mixed plantations of teak, has to be is a research gap that has to be addressed if we are looking for augmenting the teak plantations in the near future. Stocking status is another major drawback that affects our plantations. And we could see that nearly 20% was understocked and nearly 40% was overstocked. So this is one of the major causes of productivity decline in the long run. So hazards, of course, you all will be aware, pest, fires, invasives are major causes of productivity decline. The teak defoliator, which can cause up to 44% of the volume increment of the tree during the first 4 to 9 years. Then the teak sapling border is there, teak trunk border is there. Another major operation that is usually followed is the slash burning that follows the clear felling of teak. So what happens is basically the entire area will be burned to remove and clear the land. This will surely add bases and other required nutrients during the first year and will boost the plant growth. But what happens after the rains is that the entire thing gets washed down to the valleys. So this practice in due course will deplete the land of its essential fertility. So what we can do is like basically go for a minimum tillage sort of thing or minimum planting clearance, where the plant has to be planted, that area can be just cleared and planted it, and the debris can be left as such on the land for decomposition and addition as organic matter. This also is very important from the climate change point of view, because we will be emitting a lot of carbon dioxide by burning these slashes. Then forest certification is an important thing that we will have to look into, because in the US they have already enacted the Lacey Act, and Europe is on its way by 2030 to phase out all timber that has no valid certification. A few initiatives that are worth quoting is the DRC Agroforestal Limited in Brazil, which cultivates nearly 40,000 hectares of planted teak and has an FSC certification since 1997. Ghana, Form Ghana is another major private limited taking up plantations in Ghana. And here they are having a very good benefit sharing mechanism, where the Forestry Commission will receive something like 12% of the total standing tree volume value. Then Form Ghana will receive 80%. The landowner who gives the land on lease for taking up these plantations will have 6%, and local community will receive 2%, along with the assured employment in that particular plantation. So this is one worth emulating in India also, to promote teak plantations in trees outside areas, forest outside areas. Then Cambodia also Teak Farms Company Limited. This is an FSC certified, producer certified grade A teak plantations. So they claim that their mean annual increment with high intensive management of teak is more than 10 meter cube per hectare per year. Then smallholder teak plantations has to be promoted. Is a recent demand and supply of timber in Kerala state shows that nearly more than 90% of the teak, more than 90% of the timber, not only teak, comes from outside forest in Kerala. So and homesteads or agroforestry systems are a major provider of teak wood. So we will have to provide smallholder teak plantations, because teak has got an emotional attachment and a psychological attachment with the consumers of wood in Indian market. So the demand is going to increase. So the smallholder teak plantations, as we cannot fell our pristine forest systems, most deciduous forest or any other forest systems, and plant teak like that happened during the colonial era. We will have to find new areas for planting teak, and smallholders or agroforestry systems will be the best option to improve the teak plantations. And this will also be provide an impetus to the Paris agreements and the commitments that India has made to achieve by 2030. So we will have to delineate sites for smallholder teak plantations, then ensure that high quality planting material is made available. Then package of practices for smallholder teak plantations has to be standardized, because in plantations, we just for an example, we can go for 1.8 to 2 meter spacing, but in smallholder plantations, it can go up to like 4 to 4.5 meters, which has been found very effective in agroforestry studies, especially in Southeast Asia. Then we will have to have a realistic cost benefit analysis of smallholder teak plantation at what year they can harvest to get the maximum benefit. That has to be calculated, which will vary from region to region in India because of the labor cost and other input cost. that exist in different parts. Then tenure security and ease of felling permissions. The felling permissions in most of the regions, as I understand, teak is not what you call restricted item if it is not from a notified area. And
Sandeep, can you conclude now, because we have one more
sir,
participant?
this is getting over, sir. So smallholder teak plantations has to be promoted. Then certification and all, as I have already suggested. These are some examples from West Africa, then Indonesia, Papua New Guinea. Then we are having the TeakNet to provide all the basic information on teak, which completed its 25 years of establishment in 2020, and it is governed by an international steering committee from FAO, ITTO, UFRO, Ghana Forestry Commission, University of Helsinki, Timber Imports Association of India, and from Portugal, Waka Forest Investment Services. We are conducting the 4th World Teak Conference in Ghana during 5 to 8 September 2022, and I invite you all to this meeting. So to conclude with, teak remains as one of the most preferred species in the tropical timber market. And as I pointed out, India remains a major consumer of teak. Timber prices have shown a steady growth over a period. Even during the COVID pandemic, the teak timber market holds very stable. So proper site selection, targeted planting material, timely and proper plantation management, and hazard prevention of is utmost importance in raising good plantations. Timber certification should be considered very seriously to access international markets in the near future, and smallholder teak plantation should be promoted even with public-private partnership options. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sandeep, for making very detailed presentation by giving a clear picture on the status of teak across the globe and trends in timber trade.